My name is Bob Steidel. I'm the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, and I work with the infrastructure. My role was to plan for, prepare, and execute the removal of the monuments in the City of Richmond. My team is, they're doers. They make things happen. So when we knew in 2019 going into 2020 that the law was going to change, and we knew the mayor's vision was to take the monuments down as soon as possible around July 1st of 2020. And we began planning. We began doing the pre-leg work that we needed to do to be prepared for when we got the word go from what the law says the legislation had to be, and all the decisions that had to be made by elected people, not people like us. We're just going to carry out the task. So it's a lot of things, happened at the beginning of 2020. The George Floyd murder happened. So many things, COVID, the whole world changed, but we couldn't stop preparing. So we kept going with that. And at that time, too, just out of coincidence, I was joined by Adam Pohl, who works in my office, and Adam took on a very large role doing the prep work and doing a lot of planning and making sure that we stayed on track to be able to do it. He was invaluable in this entire process to make sure that it happened and to make sure that it got carried out all the way through the final project. Well, obviously I'm a white guy. I would drive by them and I would see them, and of course when people come from out of town, I would take them on Monument Avenue, along with many other places in the city, and they would see these monuments. And I was always puzzled why we had monuments to people who fought a war and lost them. My family's from Germany, and we don't have statues in Germany for Hitler. And it just baffled me, I guess, more than anything else. And I understood from the people I work with, very close friends who have lived here in Richmond all their lives, that my perception of the statues were statues. Their perception of the statues were oppression and absolute. You put somebody high on a pedestal so they look over your head and down on you, and it's a way of saying, you're nothing, really. And over time, I realized, that all the jokes about the Northern War of aggression and the Southern War of this, and it just, at the end of the day, it was a bad war for a bad purpose to enslave people, and I don't know why it stayed. Why did we keep these monuments up? I don't like monuments to start with. I don't think we should put monuments up to anybody, because I don't think anybody in the end may measure up 100% to what everybody else wants. But we call schools after people, we call buildings after people, we put up statues, and what do we really know about those people? What did they have to do with the history of Richmond? Rosa Bowser, who helped to create the library we're sitting in here, we don't have a statue to her. We don't have a building named after her, but the things that she did were entirely different than the purposes behind it. A couple of those statues were put up because they were marketing gimmicks for subdivisions. You had people who were going to sell houses because there was a statue of A.P. Hill by their neighborhood. It just, the more I looked at it, the more stupid it seemed. And it just, but this is Richmond where you don't change anything, and this is Richmond where a thought never, a good thought goes to die, and bad thoughts just seem to be the one to stay on the forefront. So I think the monuments were toxic. I think the monuments should never have been allowed to stay up as long as they did. even the monuments that I saw, is maybe a little on the edge. The monument to Matthew Montaigne Forey, Matthew Morey, was, it still was, it should not have been there. It should have gone to the Morey Foundation, which is up there in Connecticut. But, I was always curious as to why they put it up in the first place. But it just never have been. The addition of Arthur Ashe to the monument avenue was a good thought as to what we could do as a community to maybe make Monument Avenue be for all monuments, but then in the end, why have any monuments? Why not have Monument Avenue with its architecture, have fountains, plantings, and a very pretty boulevard, rather than glorify men who fought against the nation and lost. So that's just my opinion, because obviously I'm not a policymaker, like I said, we're the people that do things. Hopefully one of these days we'll move Arthur Ashe's monument to the street that's now named after him. I think that would be much more appropriate, take him off of Monument Avenue and put him, where we have started to really have a whole sense of community around Arthur Ashe, who did great things. So, anyway. So as I said, in 1920, we understood the laws would probably change, and of course they did change in the General Assembly in 2020. But we had thought about it, planned about it. We had gone to colleagues who had already taken statues down across the United States to get a feel for what it took to take a statue down. You have to remember at that time we had very little information about the statues. We didn't know if they were bolted down, if they were just set on top of the pedestal. We didn't know well, we knew in the case of baby Hillary, human remains supposedly buried in there, which was a complicating factor. But we started the process, quite interesting. We knew how much roughly it was going to cost. That cost was not included in the city budget. People not in the administrative branch made a decision not to include that money at that time because they wanted to spend it on other things. So, that's what politicians do. But anyhow, we knew what we were going to do. So the law changed, but then, as I said, things went crazy between COVID and the George Floyd murder, and then social unrest began. And social unrest didn't take into account that the law was going to change July 1st. It just started. So we can't break the law. The mayor was very keen to take down the statues ahead of July 1st. Many of us were very, very, we pleaded with him not to do it. We were so close. We were planned, we were ready to go. So we could take the statues down on July 1st with a good plan we had to do. What we didn't have was a contract. Nobody would touch it. We had spent probably from January, maybe February of that year, reaching out to people about who would be interested in taking this work on, who would respond to a bid for the scope of work. We were reaching out to people who had already taken the statue down in the beach, people in the New Orleans area that had taken the statue down. The people that we work with here on a routine basis, and absolutely nobody was going to touch it. Because again, you remember that time, I think we're in a much better place now than we were then, between the hatred of those who support the statue and the hatred of people who want the statues down. Nobody was going to touch it. And that became the problem. City staff, we even looked into, can the city staff buy the equipment and take it down? But it really was that was a bridge too far too, because it was going to be a chaotic time, we knew at the very beginning, and it just was not something that our city employees signed up for. So we did get a hold of, we were able to bring Paul D. Pasquale, the artist and sculptor, on board and help advise us as to what we should be looking at, thinking about as we take the statues down. And ask him, who does he know? And he didn't. But he was willing to help us, and Paul was very courageous by sticking with us the entire project. As far as advising us on the statuary, they are art, and they are something that was created that we wanted to handle them in the right way in case somebody ever wanted to use it. So that was the hard part. As time is clicking by, and we have nobody who wants to touch this project. The mayor then, I think Mr. Devon Henry reached out to the mayor. Mayor talked with Mr. Henry. There was a lot of back and forth with them, and we did share the scope with Mr. Henry. We tried to get him as much information as we can. So if he wanted to take the assignment, he could plan for it and figure out what was going to be happening, physically happening with the demolition. Really, it's not demolition. It's deconstruction. It's something I think everybody should understand. He never broke it. He always took it apart. And so he was considering the project, and that really would now bridge what we needed to get done. And I remember, I know he had hesitation because it was going to be difficult on him personally, again, given the time, given the way people were, the passions from everybody. And I remember one night, he and I were texting back and forth, and I promised him that I would be standing next to him the entire project. I said, if you take this on, we're not going to be out there leaving you alone. We'll be there with you. I said, I would be there with you and others. And basically, I was pleading with him to take the work because he was the only hope we had. And sure enough, the door. So as I said, Mr. Henry was in the public procurement law. You just don't go pluck somebody to do a job. You have a scope and you bid it. As I said, we had generated a thought as to how much money it was going to cost. Because Mr. Henry was the only person, after we sat down and did the scope, his quote was higher than what we had estimated, but not by much. It was very, very comparable with what we had estimated would be happening for the number of statues we took out in the first place. I think we took maybe 14 discrete. Amy Hill was not part of his original job. That came later. But we took, I think, 14 discrete pieces down. So, it wasn't too bad, but we had no way really under the conventional procurement to procure him. Perhaps we could have found a way to do the regular way of bidding, but it would have taken a very, very long time. And I will tell you, again, thinking about the second week of June, these things had to come down. The protesters had already pulled one down. The Jefferson Davis have already been pulled down. And if they did enough math, they could have figured out a way to pull down more of these things. You just had to have a very long lever and a lot of force. Fortunately, they didn't. They tried to cut monuments apart. They, of course, graffitied them and did everything that way. But they had to come down. Somebody was going to get hurt and killed by what was going on. They couldn't wait. you couldn't wait for a procurement that was going to take you to October, November of that year and say, oh, okay, we've done this. And so the mayor declared, as the emergency manager, declared an emergency. And I believe the courts and many people have confirmed his decision was accurate and complete and correct. That allowed us to do an emergency procurement to get Mr. Henry's services. And again, got us ready to go on the stroke of midnight on July 1st, 2020. It was the right thing to do because, again, at the time what was going on, we had the Columbus statute was pulled down. If you ever see the video, it's just the grace of God that nobody got killed on that one. We plucked the police memorial statute just the night before we were sure somebody was going to go there and try to tear that one down. Again, we were just worried about people hurting themselves. So the emergency was correct. If we were going to be able to address some parts of civil unrest, statute. So come along about the second week in June, we were now ready. All the pieces were in place. We knew what we were going to put everything as we took it down. And that in and of itself was an issue. The statutes were stored at the city's wastewater treatment plant, which has a lot of land. But again, the men and women that worked out there were going to take these things and put them in their backyard, and they had to be communicated with. And the DPU director at the time was Mr. Calvin Farr. He did a very great public service in getting ready for receiving the statues and having his people understand what was going to be happening. So that in and of itself was a very courageous thing that he did. And so we were ready. The main difficulty that we had, of course, was the community. It didn't matter which side we were on. The Richmond police at that time made a ruling that they could not protect Mr. Henry or the Richmond staff who were on site. I had plenty of my staff on site because they didn't believe. They were their assessment of the law said that they shouldn't be there. That's the police chief at that time made that. So the sheriff's department came to assist in crowd control and to protect the people who were doing the work. Of course, the Department of Public Works team closed the roads so that it was safe for the workers and the people that were there to observe. But the difficulty was that you felt like at any minute everybody would run away. At the very beginning, you just had no good feeling that this was going to turn out well and that nobody was there watching everyone's back. And again, it didn't matter whose back it was, whether you were protesting taking things down, whether you were protesting the police for being there. It was just a very difficult feeling to be doing the work. And quite frankly, many of the people who did the work received verbal abuse that was, I'm surprised by the tolerance. So that was really the hardest part. The mayor had guts. He was going to get this done, and he stuck his chin out and said, we're going to get this done. But all the rest of our elected leaders, they all disagreed. They were gone. Nobody ever came up to support them. They may have come out and stood in the crowd, but they stood in the crowd and didn't take a picture. So the first statue that came down was Stonewall Jackson. That was the one. They all showed up around noon on July 1st. And when I say all, I'm saying Mr. Henry's team showed up. Some of my team members showed up for traffic control. And the opposition, I believe, lawsuits were filed. personally against the mayor, against all kinds of things. Of course, there was all kinds of hate mail. There was all kinds of social media posting. Workers would be working and people would drive by and scream at them. In fact, it happened until we finished just last year vegetating the old Lee Circle. They were still yelling at the workers in 2023 for something that happened 3 years ago. So, yeah, just a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of. Only one time did violence, and I'm surprised by this, only one time did violence actually get to a break. The very first SU taking down Jackson, somebody with, I believe they had, I never saw the flag. I never saw the flag enough to identify it, but somebody rushed up to the base and the monument was trying to wave the flag. They were on the other side of the monument with me, and the whole crowd collapsed. But fortunately, the sheriff's department, and by that time, I believe there were some members of the Illinois, the Virginia State Police were there too, and they quickly separated that person, put them in the vehicle, and that moment of concern passed religion, and that was probably the only time that real violence almost happened. Again, just nasty things people would say. It just, and you have to remember, this is 2020, after the George Floyd murder. Nobody wanted to take, I don't care whether you were a sheriff or whether you were Richmond police, if you wore a badge, people were just absolutely taunting them. And there was, I remember a case, there was a very nice woman, sheriff, and she was just trying to keep the crowd back because there was cranes overhead and all of us wearing hard hats and protective device, and people were just walking through there concerned that they were getting hurt. And she was trying to, this one gentleman was just the most disgusting, vile person I've ever heard in my life. For someone who was just trying to make sure people safe. Because that's what passion was. And that's what it brought it out. If I could say anything surprised me, it was almost so much grandstanding by elected leaders. I'm not talking about the mayor, because the mayor stuck through it to this day. But so many of the others, they were grandstanding, and then they all disappeared. And that really did surprise me. Because I thought for sure that, it's the right thing to do, so why aren't you standing up for the right thing to do? So I was quite disappointed in the elected leaders. And I was nicely surprised that Mr. Henry did not get more adverse reaction to his role than he did. I know it was difficult for he and his family, but I anticipated worse. And maybe that was one of the good things that came out of this, is that a guy that stood up and said, I'll do this, didn't have to suffer as badly as I did. The community was really strange. At one point, the community has said, we're going to raise millions of dollars to take these statues down. We're going to give it to the city because we know it's going to be a financial hardship. And some people contributed, but if I remember right, the total was like $40,000. And we used that to help offset the cost. But I would have thought if it meant that much to some of these people who early on were grandstanding before it got to be difficult, I would have thought it would have been different. But that kind of surprised me. It did surprise me that the only people that came to city council to complain about it were not from the Richmond area. So I guess to be understood that the people who stood up there and were, how can you do this? How can you take these statues down? they were not from the city. So to me that was good. The silent majority allowed the ordinances that need to be passed to be passed. But the larger community involvement was, again, very confusing to me. Not a whole lot was said after the laws were passed and July 1st happened. The mayor said, I'm doing this. And then it was almost like, okay, well, he's going to get it done. So I don't have to play in the sandbox. He can do it. He can take care of it. He's the guy that is across the line. And it was a little confusing to me that, there was no expression of thanks from the community. And Congress there was no expression of distrust and hatred from the community, other than what you normally get. In local government, just so we all understand, there's always a baseline hatred that comes for anything we do. We can pave a street, and somebody will send us an email threatening to chop somebody's hands off. So don't. It never rose above really the baseline hatred. When the mayor did he did address crowds at City Hall a couple times, which was very courageous of him to step into the crowds. They were focusing very much on police tactics, policing, but he was actively taking down statues like they requested. And that part of the conversation, he was living up to what the community asked of him for these monuments. He didn't get the credit for it. As a public administrator, it went about as okay as you can for something like this. We don't plan to take down monuments in the middle of civil unrest. We plan to build a road. We plan to run water lines to subdivisions. We plan for that kind of stuff. The Arts Commission, the arts people, I know they plan on public art, but that's a whole different world. So it went probably as well as it possibly can. If somebody is delving into this in the future, if something has come up in the public realm that required statues to be taken down, there's a lot to be learned from what this body is. But pretty much unprecedented. New Orleans, Richmond, Raleigh, some of the southern states, they've all gone through this. And it's hopefully never be repeated. And hopefully it is an example of how government can get something done in this area. I think that public space art need to be ever evolving. It should not be any kind of static art. It should have the ability to be murals that can be painted, repainted, and repainted, or the planting of a beautiful space to be able to show, beautiful flowers or beautiful fountains or things like that. But like Thomas Jefferson said, you can always change that kind of stuff. So I think always the public expression should always have the ability to be changed, and it should have the ability to be understood as well as possible, but interpreted by many. It's public. We shouldn't, again, put up statues of a particular person. We should never name a building after a particular person unless they can reach such a high standard. And I don't know who's equipped to judge that standard, because I certainly. But public art space is necessary, it's important, but it really, really cannot be static in any shape or form, and it should always inform. I do not think that anybody until you have a little bit of space to be able to look back and really understand what happened. It was so difficult for so many people for so many reasons. And I think that the process, given the time, and again, after a very horrific murder, it should teach us that we, for years, talked about something, the monuments and how they were seen as a vision of oppression. Well, we talked for so many years, but then it only took us weeks to take them down. And the world hasn't ended. The world hasn't fallen apart. The world hasn't changed because of that action. And, I don't think anybody loves a statue. I don't think anybody loves peace and art. No. I'm sure maybe some people do. But I don't think anybody can feel about leaving any of those statues up than they can feel if they stand in a Richmond park and see all the people using the park and enjoying it and doing all the things, or stand anywhere where kids are playing, or in a library where people can learn. That's what we should love our public infrastructure, and understand that the world didn't come apart just because we took down some statues that arguably should never have been put up in the place. Nothing, but it took a lot, and especially when you read the media coverage and you see the media footage. I tell you, stories sure got slanted, but the base story was it happened, and it happened. And I think that this will be only studied in the future and will not be repeated. Well, at this point, this is August of 2024. The story's still not over. The statues and all of the platforms still exist. They were all taken apart very carefully. They were numbered. They're stored. The statue of Robert E. Lee still sits on a flatbed trailer. It's in two pieces because it's too big for them to take down one piece. But they're still there. They haven't moved. Jeannie Walker, who you will interview, did a fantastic job of archiving everything that is in storage, whether it's statues or whether it's the rocks, the pillars. I mean, the pillars still have the graffiti on them. So I'm going to be curious to see how the story is going to be told further into the future with whatever happens to both the statuary as well as the stones. That's quite interesting. As I said earlier, the statue of A.P. Hill did have A.P. Hill's remains in it, and the A.P. Hill family did reinter his remains in a cemetery in Culpeper, Virginia, and that does close that particular loop. But the statue itself is still in storage. The stones that were his cemetery marker are still in storage. The family didn't want the stones. It was difficult to take the stones. But yeah, the story's still not done. And I'll be curious to see how it ends. Sure.